Version 1.3 is bringing a lot. A new limited character, a new 4-star character, and something that might have been the real highlight of the livestream, a new 4-cost Echo, and the absolute giga-chad of a boss that it drops from. The fallacy of no return has, without a doubt, awakened something within the player base, and thankfully, Kuro has given us a preview of what exactly this Echo does. With a combination of spectro damage and the rejuvenating Glow Sonata set, this Echo is tailor-made for Shorekeeper and Sustainers as a whole, as it matches the role and attribute of our newest limited character. As the second 4-cost Echo joining the Healer set, now in direct competition with the S-tier Bellborn Geochalone, this new Echo brings a lot of potential to the table. Considering how almost every team in the game runs the Rejuvenating Glow set, this Echo already has a lot of value. But as every player knows, farming and rolling for a new Echo can be one of the most painful experiences in the game. With an effect that grants a unique buff focused on personal energy generation and an attack boost across the entire party, this Echo provides an alternative way of buffing the team that has its own set of nuanced pros and cons. The question is it better than the Bellborn Geochalone? Is it worth going through the RNG-fueled substat grind? Is it a must-farm Echo? Today we'll be breaking down whether or not this new 4-cost Echo is actually worth it, diving into the use cases of its effect, where it's stronger or weaker than the currently existing Healer 4-cost, and the massive potential this Echo has in diversifying your skill choices across other members of your team. It might be one of the most unique additions to the game to date. As always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. One of the biggest factors in determining the best Echo skill to run on the character is the buff that it provides, especially when every single Echo skill in the game already inflicts damage. A majority of DPS characters gravitate towards an Echo skill that buffs their attribute damage and a secondary damage type. Support characters, on the other hand, typically run a skill that instead buffs the team. The fallacy of no return at first glance looks like an Echo that belongs to a DPS character. However, its Echo effect is anything but that. While we don't have the exact numbers on this buff, when taking a look at other Echo skills, we can imagine that this number will land between 10 and 15%. When this buff is running in direct competition with the Bellborn Geochalone, which provides a 50% damage reduction and a 10% damage boost, the fallacy's bonus can seem a bit lackluster at first. After all, a 10% damage boost is likely going to have a larger impact on your total damage than a 10 to 15% attack that the fallacy provides. The real situation, however, is a bit more complicated. This is because the Bellborn Geochalone's effect, despite lasting 15 seconds, will immediately end if your characters get hit by 3 attacks. That means with enough mistakes, you'll completely lose the entire 15% damage buff. And when Wuthering Waves is a game with extremely aggressive enemies and a lot of potential for those mistakes, this could be one of the shortest buffs in the game. What this means is that for the average player with a fully built healer, the fallacy of no return is likely going to be the better Echo, strictly because of the fact that it has a lot more room for mistakes. You won't lose your entire damage bonus from tanking a few hits, and when you play characters like Shang Liao, Jian, or Jinxi, who have mandatory attacks that they must use to deal a majority of their damage and built-in interruption resistance on those attacks, tanking hits will oftentimes lead to the best overall DPS. While the overall damage buff will be less than the Bellborn Geochalone, the fallacy will have a much higher uptime for a majority of players. However, if you're an absolute demon on your dodges and never get hit more than 2 times in your entire team's rotation, you'll get better results damage-wise sticking with the turtle. However, the team-wide damage buff isn't the only thing that the new Echo provides. While the Bellborn Geochalone has much of its utility baked into its damage reduction effect, the fallacy instead provides a personal energy generation buff. When one of the biggest factors of a support's performance is their rotation time, and Resonance Energy is a huge contributor to shortening that rotation time, energy regen is an essential stat for any support, and this Echo's bonus should help ease up on the substat requirement for these characters. However, this stat isn't that helpful if you already have a lot of energy regeneration substats stats on your echoes. A common trend in the fallacy of no returns effect is that it provides a lot more convenience to the player, with easier echo building, more accessible buffs, but lower overall performance if you're a highly skilled player that already has great energy regeneration substats. But with that, most people are going to use the simpler option, and this new echo is easier to use. To sweeten the deal even more, this echo is also a lot easier to farm. The fallacy's biggest advantage might be the fact that, from what we've seen, it will only drop the Rejuvenating Glow echo. Nearly every single player who's actively farmed for the Bellborn Geochalone understands that before cost dropping 2 potential sets can be one of the most frustrating experiences in the game. However, this frustration could also lead to a lot more potential on our accounts. That's because the Bellborn Geochalone's other droppable set is Moonlit Clouds. In the current state of the game, with your healer running the Geochalone and your sub DPS running the Impermanence Heron, there's almost no circumstance where you'd want to run the Moonlit Clouds version of the turtle. However, with the release of the fallacy, players now have the option of choosing between the turtle and the heron when it comes to their sub DPS's echo skill, and this adds a lot of diversity to team building. If you're playing a character like Jian who never wants to swap off field during their rotation, the heron's consistent 12% damage buff on outro skill will likely be the best option. However, if you're playing with a team that occasionally swaps between the main DPS and the sub DPS, like with Dan Jin and Havoc Rover, the Geochalone's ability to retain its buff between character swaps and activate without an outro skill could lead to some interesting dual DPS compositions. We'll just have to see what players end up cooking in version 1.3. But it's just great knowing that all of those moonlit turtles might have a use in the future. God knows we have a lot of them. The fallacy of no return seems to check off a lot of the boxes when it comes to simplifying many areas of the game, from actually farming the echo to streamlining character building, all the way to having much higher overall buff uptime in typical gameplay. However, we have to address the elephant in the room, and that's the cast time on the echo. This echo looks like it'll take quite a while to fully activate, and every preview of this echo has the active character making no actions at all, so it's unclear whether or not this echo can be swapped mid-animation while still fully activating its effects. Echoes like the Bellborn Geochalone activate almost instantaneously, so we can only hope that the activation of the fallacy is similarly simple. Otherwise, it might just be too clunky to use, even if its effects are great. There's a reason why nobody uses the Thundering Mephis, even on characters like Calcharo or Shangli Yao. Overall, this new echo looks like it'll be an absolute blast. Taking into account its effects, active skill, and the boss it drops from, it's a fantastic new addition to the game. We can only hope it feels as good to use as it is cool to look at. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.